have the radical, groundbreaking books that helped shape my early feminist and creative outlook. Books such as Conditions 5, The Black Women's Issue, 1979, edited by Barbara Smith and Lorraine Bethel, which was the first such black women's anthology to reach a national readership in the US. And I couldn't get enough of Homegirls, a black feminist anthology published in 1983, edited by Barbara Smith again, with its mix of black women's writings. Her stated aim was, quote, to present black feminism at the present time and to retain its literary focus. Interestingly, the wife of the current mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, Shirlane McCrae, was one of the poets in this anthology. I also treasured Black Women Writers at Work, a series of interviews edited by Claudia Tate, which got inside the minds of a host of fantastic leading African-American women writers. And then again, there was Audre Lorde, who visited the UK a few times in the 80s and was a hit with us. We were so pleased that she wanted to meet us. I remember her refusing to speak at an event at the Drill Hall, then a home for radical performance, unless the black women who didn't have seats and were waiting outside had been accommodated. She was already a feminist icon, but she acknowledged us. Her book of essays, Sister Outsider, urged black women to speak out with, "What are the words you do not yet have? What do you need to say? What are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you sicken of them and die?" I cannot overestimate the significance of these African-American women thinkers and writers on the growth of literature by my community of aspiring writers and artists. They were among the first to powerfully counter a black political activism and white mainstream feminism that excluded the black female voice. Bell Hooks's Ain't I a Woman was also a galvanizing force for our community of writers with her explorations of black feminism, black male sexism, and white racism. And when Carol Boyce Davis stressed in her book, Black Women, Writing and Identity, that the autobiographical subjectivity of black women is one of the ways in which speech is articulated, it was certainly true of black British women's early literary production, writing poetry, short stories and plays from a black female and often personal perspective. Yet, ours was a community that still lived in the shadow of these African-American women writers, such as Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, Gloria Naylor, and Ntozake Shange, many of whom began to be published in Britain in the 1980s at a time when British publishers said there was no market for homegrown novels by black women. So while they were a huge inspiration at first, they also, strangely, became part of the problem. Beverly Bryan, Stella Dadzi, and Suzanne Scaife, who is here somewhere, who edited The Heart of the Race, Black Women's Lives in Britain, in 1985, summed up our predicament when they wrote, quote, "Thanks to our sisters in the United States, this silence is at last beginning to be broken, and for the first time black women have a voice. But the voice comes from America, and although it speaks directly to our experience in Britain, it does not speak directly of it," unquote. At the end of the decade, Maud Salter, who later went on to have a career as a successful fine arts photographer with work lodged in many galleries and museums, and who sadly died too young in 2008, edited Passion, Discourses on Black Women's Creativity in 1990. It became the first, and I suspect only, such book to collect both the visual and written production of some of the writers, theatre makers, and visual artists from this period of our creativity. Just as the feminist movement brought about foundational changes in women's lives in the 20th century, black feminist literary activism paved the way to opening up both society and aspiring black women writers to the possibilities of a black women's literature that was still to come into being. While this process of revisioning a new Britain that included us was a speaking out, it was initially only to ourselves. Other than Buchi Emecheta and Beryl Gilroy, both first-generation writers, we young women weren't really being heard beyond our own community. One of the first women of my generation to receive national attention was Jamaican-born writer Joan Riley, who came to prominence with her first novel, The Unbelonging, in 1985, published, interestingly, by the Women's Press, who 2 years earlier had published The Colour Purple. but also, interestingly, who were loath to publish other black women's writing. The story is about an 11-year-old working-class Jamaican girl called Hyacinth, who was sent to Britain to live with her father. Here was a young Caribbean person arriving in Britain, not as a 1950s